Bust out some walls and make a balcony. I mean, my
Landlord's
security
probably cool with
deposit's
that,
only
right?
my security deposit's only like, let's put it this way. It would be like my security deposit is very small compared to the amount of pleasure I would get from having a balcony for a few months over the summer. So I'm assuming that they're not going to like I don't know. I don't know actually. They could probably sue me for a lot more
Yeah,
than
I
my
was gonna
security
say.
deposit.
That sounds like a court case.
Like
Tenant
if that
removed
wasn't the
the
case,
roof.
then yeah, exactly. I could like take that security deposit and like I'd just say fuck it and put a whole other floor on top and like rent out that floor up there. It only cost me $1,000 of my security deposit and then all the construction costs. I made so much money.
Yeah. What could go
I'm
wrong?
sure that wouldn't fly. Yeah, exactly.
Permitting?
Um, well, that's actually another thing in Vienna that's interesting. There's so many like protected buildings, like not just in the first district, but in a lot of the other districts. Like there's a ton of the city that's protected, and that's why it all looks like wedding cakes, right? Um, every building looks like a wedding cake, and it gets a little bit exhausting after a while. But those facades are all preserved. So there was only a small period in time, depending on the district, where you could actually change those facades, demolish them, modify them. Now you can't even, you got to get like a permit to get like a color change on the paint. You know, they want to keep the paint the same color. So the only thing that you can really do in most of the older districts is build on top.
Right.
So this actually becomes like a really cool feature that, you know, from the street level you don't see it, but if you get like a vista of some buildings, they all have different hats, like and much more interesting hats. Like, yeah, it's cool. Like Coop Himmelblau has this like crazy deconstructivist entity on top of one that's near my university, a few blocks from my university. Dulugan Meisel has one. Like it's just kind of a cool thing that you have if you're a Viennese architect. You have a weird fancy penthouse because it doesn't bother the facade. You can go crazy on top.
Yeah.
It's just like if you're, you know, boring everywhere else, you get a crazy hairstyle. I guess.
I feel like Coop is like, if any firm is going to do a weird hat, feels
Yeah.
like them.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to their summer party next weekend. They should actually make this a theme, like a weird hat party. And just like show up with the craziest hat that you can. Like
Yeah.
I think that would fit them. It belongs in this era of architecture, like where people used to dress up like their buildings and go to parties.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of
Except I
the
think
one picture of
yeah, it's got like the guys dressed as their skyscrapers
yeah, like
or
the
whatever.
Sears Tower or something. There's one in
Yeah,
particular that
there's
I'm thinking of that I feel like is a Chicago Tower. All the guys look like such dorks. It's like
yeah,
it's
it's
awesome.
they probably really were like super cringy people. Like they thought that was the biggest gag ever. They probably had their people in their model shops working day and night to get those costumes to work. Actually,
The
come to think of
interns.
it, the dark history.
Yeah.
Should we do the clap?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, I'm really jealous of your beer.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Should I pour it into the seltzer can so you don't have to see it?
No, because that looks like beer too. I'm just gonna be judgmental. The thing is, I was at the Donau Inselfest, which is like a Viennese music festival, last night, and I had a few
Okay.
beers, and I'm trying not to drink, you know, every day, despite the fact that it's so relaxing, because then it keeps my, you know, running schedule better.
Yeah.
But you can see I'm like red as a lobster, and I'm sweating. It would be fantastic.
No, I do a little envious of your actual exercise regimen. I've been trying to like get back into like a routine. It's just not happening. But we'll get there.
It's like an addiction. Like I think once you start it and then you get addicted to it, it's like I don't know. It's an obsession somehow. It's probably not so healthy. I'm probably gonna have knee issues in like a few months or something. Especially because like I'm trying to pace out how often I buy new running shoes, because that gets expensive.
Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, like just like getting into it as a habit, like it starts to feel really nice. Like I
Yeah.
can definitely recommend it.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
doing good. I don't know, it's a while ago now, but doing good for a little while, and it did feel good. It was like waking up in the morning was like, oh yeah, all right, I
Exactly.
like this.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like there's nothing that compares to the feeling like waking up at 5 in the morning and burning 1,000 calories.
I wasn't doing that. I was still like working out like in the evening after work, but I feel like just like I would sleep better and just I feel
Yeah,
like overall
yeah.
just feel better waking up. I'm usually not like a I like mornings, but I'm not like a workout in the morning kind of person. I guess unless I'm
It's
backpacking,
like it's
which
like
is kind of
a
different.
yeah, it's like a balance thing, I guess. Like whatever rhythm that you find that works. I mean, for me, I just like to like it's like meditation in the morning.
Hmm.
But if I was lifting, which I don't do, which I probably should do, once I move into a better apartment, I'll probably start like with home gym stuff more like together. But that's better at the end of the day because then you can just like you have all this rage after work and you just want to work it off.
Just want to pick things up about it.
Yeah. Oh, my fucking boss! I just want to pick things up and put them down. Now I get that guy. He probably has an awful job.
Mr. Pop.
The idea that spaces are literally for everybody and that you can share something with anybody indiscriminately is false.
Cool.
Oh, did we do that at the same time?
I think so. I mean, I didn't hear you clap, so I'm gonna take that as a good sign.
Okay. We'll work it out. Don't worry. The magic of editing. Yeah. So, this is our 4th episode of Architov after a short break. Apologies for the break. I was moving. There was a lot of chaos, but we're back. And we're doing a special episode today. It's just myself, Zach, and Keith. And we're talking about Keith's recent article on the website, Utopia For Who. Super fantastic article. It was really, really interesting to read through, and I think we're going to have like a really fun little discussion about it today. And there's so many like capitalistic tangents I want to go on that I'm going to have to like prevent myself from like raging about. But yeah, do you want to give us an overview of the paper?
Yeah, totally. So I wrote it. I wrote it originally like several years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I think, as a submission to another journal who did not accept it. But it was under like the
Their
theme
loss.
of
Their loss.
yeah, it happens. But the theme was like float or floating or something of the sort. And I had been reading Bruno Latour's "We Have Never Been Modern," and he has this segment where he's talking about Archimedes, kind of like turning the world upside down with his leveraging of essentially like scientific principles for the military defense of Syracuse. And Latour talks about how he just changes like the whole equation of political power in the ancient world by introducing like science and math into it. Rather than just like, before that it was kind of like brute force of like number of people was like the equation of who has political power. Whether that's like an
Right.
accurate thing to say that like Archimedes is singularly credited with that kind of shift in history is another question, I guess. But like the basis of Latour's book is kind of about the artificial distinction between nature and culture that he sees as like a defining feature of modernism, like keeping those two things apart. And he breaks down all sorts of examples of how the world of science and nature and like math and our understanding of the physical world and the objects in it impacts and interacts with culture and politics and power and society. So I just kind of use that as like a launching point, thinking like Archimedes, like in the tub, like buoyancy was like, oh, floating. Okay, I'll start with that. Um, but then kind of like launch off into thinking through different ideas of like technology and society and power. So I think I start with Bucky Fuller and Soji Sadao, and like the floating city thing, and like these promises of like utopia through technology, kind of as a 21st century thing. How like high technology is used to like essentially advertise like the promise of a utopian future, but then contrasting that with how these technologies have kind of actually been deployed by the powers that be. So it's kind of a critique of utopianism that doesn't situate itself within the reality of existing power structures. So I think I wanted to read like a portion of the essay that I think is kind of a good summary and like gets to the heart of, I think, like the point of the whole thing.
Yeah.
This is not an admonishment of utopian projects per se, but a critique of their deployment within the context of an ever-expanding techno-capitalist reality. The hegemonic system sells us utopic visions of well-being and sustainability that are often predicated on exactly the extractive and exploitative economies that create the very dystopic realities that we are promised escape from. As we learn from Latour's example of Archimedes, technology is never simply a neutral tool, but is entangled in existing webs of politics, power, and social relations. As such, techno-utopic visions without interrogation of power relations become what Felicity Scott identifies in her essay Acid Visions as, quote, the covert structure of a loss of historical and political consciousness, end quote. By focusing on the promise of a universalized and benevolent technological revolution, we are distracted from the socio-political forces that prevent our existing technological repertoire from being used for the common good. What then does this mean for the role of the architect, that profession of whom it is said must be hopeful by necessity? So that's kind of like, I think that passage kind of gets to the gist of like the point of the whole thing. It's kind of looking at like bits and pieces of these different projects throughout kind of time and like different programs and kind of ideas driving them, but they're all kind of situated in this like bubble of like technology is going to save us, but without kind of diving deeper into like the kind of web that's entangled in. So I think overall it's a pretty short piece, but like it's one I still like, which is far from the case with like a lot of essays. You know, sometimes you come back to things and it's like after a few years and like, wow, that doesn't hold up. But I think this one, like
that feeling is called cringing. Cringe at your own work.
Yeah, luckily this one, like I don't cringe at. Like I still feel like it's relevant. I still feel like it
definitely
hits a lot of points that like I still think about, and I think it lands in a place for me that's still very much like a question. Where do we go from here? That like I don't think it really wraps up like well. I think the point was always that it's kind of like prods at different spots and there's different like threads that you can unravel of it. Like I feel like there's a bunch of different ways you can go. But I think it's still something like the ideas I'm still kind of like digesting and working through. And
yeah, it raises some big questions because like, especially from that excerpt that you just read, I think one of the key themes is this notion of like technology's relationship to utopia, right? And that comes with it the political forces that incentivize the development of those technologies. And then if there are political forces that are incentivizing the development of those technologies, what is the role of the utopia that's projected with the use of that technology? And I mean, yeah, that's the question, utopia for who? I suppose exactly. But this may be a bit too early, in the discussion to ask this, but can you even really have utopia that's not mediated by the technology of private or political interests?
I mean, that's a great question. I think I wasn't thinking about this before, but as you started talking about that, I was just thinking about like the like origin of the idea of utopia, like Thomas More and like No Place, but it was all bound up in like the enclosure movement and like the commons as a thing. That I think that's an interesting relationship to like technology, because that was like the very beginning of like the modern age where we started like launching into rapid technological process and the kind of commodification.
What did More say about it though? What was More's idea about it?
Oh, put me on the spot. It's been like 20 years since I read any of that.
I actually haven't read that, so I don't know. Like, but what time period was this?
1600s. So it's like happening
Okay,
he
okay.
wrote it at the same time as like the commons are being enclosed in England and like Great Britain.
Yeah.
So it's kind of I think it's very it's timely, the point he was writing it at, as like things are being privatized and land is being snatched up and taken away from like the community, or like um,
Right.
the like common ownership and common use and stewardship. So it's just kind of interesting that that's like a critique, is like the capitalist structure of commodification and like the advertising of utopia, but that becomes wrapped up in like now present day. Yeah, exactly what you're saying. I feel like those ideas are wrapped up in the whole idea of technology, but it's interesting that kind of the beginning of the idea of utopia, I feel like less is less about the technology and maybe more about like the privatization, like social
Hmm.
relations and like ownership. Um,
But there have been like other historical attempts that I think were not so driven by technology. I mean, look at the French Revolution, and I don't think I'm thinking of the main one. It might have been the one that's right after the main one, where the anarchists took over Paris for
the
like,
commune,
uh,
what, 78, 76, 78, something like
yeah, I
that.
think it was something like this. Yeah,
Hmm.
78,
Yeah,
and
the
it was
Paris
like
Commune.
a year or 3 years. Yeah, exactly. And like there were a lot of, I mean, it didn't last very long. Um, Kind of hard for something like that to last too long with enough outside forces working against it. But there were a lot of things that came out of those eras of revolution, and that was an attempt at I think a non-technological utopia, or at least we contextualize it this way just based on our discussion. Um, there's a really interesting book I have about Paris's gardens, and there's a reason that like all of these French painters in the Impressionistic era after the Revolution painted all of these extremely boring paintings of people sitting in parks, and like they're boring.
Because that
I
was
mean, I'm
like
sorry.
a
It's like
revolutionary urban like feature that like
it was.
yeah.
It was. It's boring to us because I just grab my stuff and I go sit on a park in the weekend like it's a normal thing. Like this is something that in our time we have private or public parks that are not privatized, and we have the luxury of going to sit in them. But before the revolutions, those parks were owned. They were owned by royalty. They were owned by other political or economic forces, depending on where you were. And when the people went into the castles, when they went to the Louvre and tore down the fourth wall of the Louvre, and then exposed all these gardens and everything to the public, um, after this revolution, you finally had this opportunity where you could go sit in the park for once. And that was, utopia is probably always a relative concept. Like,
Mhm.
thus again, the question, utopia for who? But that was probably an extremely utopic time in the city where you could, at least for the first time, sit in a park that a king used to own. No one could ever do this before. So, yeah, of course, they painted paintings of it all the time. But um, I don't know. That's just an example I can think of a utopia occurring without technology, but with a concerted political force behind it.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the examples of almost like worker commune utopias. There were a couple industrialists in the late 1800s, I think, that started them.
Oh
I think
yeah.
there's one in
Well, you know
France,
about
and what are you gonna say?
there's Fordlandia.
Fordlandia. I don't know if I know this one. The
I
wh- the
I shit you not. Fordlandia. I need you to Google it.
Google.
Um,
Oh, of course it's in
it's
Brazil.
real. Yeah, it's in Brazil of all places. Like, where else are you gonna make a collective and like try to avoid governmental oversight? You're gonna do it in Brazil, right? Um, I forgot what this is. Probably like I don't know the 20s or something like this. And he tried to start a factory town, his own little society, and he called it Fordlandia. It was a huge company town. It was apparently absolutely awful to live in, and I think it collapsed within a few years. I don't know if it collapsed because of a revolution, but he really tried to create his own.
I mean, he also built it in the Amazon rainforest.
Yeah, it's a terrible idea.
Completely divorced from any of like the like industrial infrastructure he relied on for like his work. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a terrible idea. Like really, really bad. Like not only divorced from the like any kind of industrial infrastructure, like energy, roads, shipping, anything like that you would just normally think of, but I mean the climate. Consider the Amazon itself. Like it's brutal to humans. It's not for humans.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of this one. I was thinking of the one. I want to say it was like the precursor to like Frigidaire or something. There's like a appliance manufacturer in the U.S. in probably similar timeline, like 1920s maybe.
It wasn't General Electric, was it? There was General Electric. There was Westinghouse, I think. They're the ones that did the electric generators, I think, with DC current.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably getting some of this history wrong, and
yeah, I clearly didn't come prepared to talk about this portion of the banter.
Yeah, it's like some random stuff from history. If I don't know, I guess should go say, if you hear something that's wrong on a podcast, by all means you can comment. No one's going to read your comments. It's a podcast. It's not always going to be right. Just relax.
Yeah. Full disclosure. Like not sure I'm saying anything accurate right now.
Yeah, so you're not listening to. I hope you don't cite this. I hope you never cite a podcast. On the other hand, cite a podcast. Do it. It'll be funny. We can change reality by just becoming reality. If you ever edited Wikipedia, you're doing the same thing.
True.
But there's this like hubris behind Fordlandia or any of these corporatist, let's call them, or technological, maybe by extension, also technological utopias that are different than like the Paris Commune,
mm-hmm.
Which were more political utopias, or various nomad societies, or the societies like the Mesa Rats that are built up in the desert that all live off grid. These are all political ideals that are not guided by a single organizing power, whereas the corporatist ones, I guess, can't really have a governmental utopia. That's just a normal government. And the technological ones all seem to be at the hubris of those in charge and for the profits of those in charge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's like who has the economic and political capital and resources to actually pursue like projects of those scale that are often presented, like I don't know, maybe a good segue into Big's floating city.
Yeah, you got to tell me about this one. I actually don't know much about oceanics.
Honestly, there's not much to know. I was looking because like I said, I wrote this essay maybe 4 years ago, and at that time, like, this was a relatively new project that was just like they were kind of touting it as like, oh, the world's first floating city, which that in itself kind of bullshit. Like there's other like floating communities, right, all over the world. I
mean, a cruise ship is a floating city. Like, come on.
But it was presented as this, grand unveiling, world's like first floating city, and that was, I think, 2019 was when it was unveiled. But like, I haven't been able to find any updates to it. I think the last thing I found was like 2022. And there's a curious, like, I feel like paring down of expectations. Like the original press releases are like, city to support like 100,000 people, and if you go to the like Oceanics actually has a website now, and now it's like 10,000 people, which I feel like is still too many people based on their like little renderings and diagrams. I'm like, I don't think that's enough buildings for 10,000 people.
10,000 people with timeshares. So you're only there for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's
So
just,
it's like
just 1,000 people that are just there for 2 weeks.
Yeah, which I guess kind of speaks to the like the same idea of like who has the resources to like pursue a project like this, and it starts as like this kind of grand vision, and then it slowly gets like whittled away at, and like you don't hear anything about it,
Yeah.
and like the realities
Yeah.
of actually building something like this set in over the course of years or whatever it is. This one's kind of interesting though, because apparently it has like support from the UN, which is a weird thing.
To do what? Why is the UN supporting this?
I
Many
don't know.
other things that they need to be busy with right now.
Yeah, probably. I think it's well, 5 years ago they were pretty bored. Not much to do.
Oh yeah, there wasn't anything happening before 3 years ago.
But I think it keys into like their portrayal of like their sustainable development goals.
Yeah.
And I think speaks to like the advertisement of the development, like what it's envisioned as, which is this kind of like, oh, rising sea level, this is a solution for like people in coastal areas, which seems naive to me.
Yeah, it does seem naive. So this leads to the question, which coastal area are they talking about putting it on?
This is South Korea.
Okay. So South Korea, with all of the money in the world, all of the resources, economic resources at their disposal, instead of doing something to shore up their coastlines, they're just going to build a new city that's floating over the water. It would be amazing if some place like Lagos had the opportunity to do this.
Yeah.
A lot of these utopias are already these seasteading kind of things, these dream pie in the sky things. They come from places that are already part of empire, and they serve those places that are part of empire, not the places that are actually suffering from the climate catastrophes created by the empires.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just really always you always read about one of these and it's like, oh, it's sustainable and it's like really great and all this kind of stuff, and maybe the UN is behind it, maybe I don't know, some NGOs are behind it or something like this, and it's like, okay, maybe this is positive, and then it's like, okay, so it's going to give South Korea more real estate.
And like a tourist
Cool.
district or something where they can be like, oh, look how cool this is.
Yeah, floating neon or something like this. Like,
Yeah. No, it's interesting because they talk about how we're gonna grow food in the floating, like the floating greenhouses and whatever. So like the square footages that they have associated with that are like, you're not growing food for anybody. It's like you're providing some vegetables for like some niche like farm to table like dining experience for people to visit, or I don't know. It's kind of peculiar.
Yeah, you can have this ice cream with the sea-steaded strawberries. It costs you $17.
Trademark.
Yeah, and there's a little symbol that's next to it to make you feel good about yourself. You bought the sustainable sea-steading option.
Yeah, I did want to talk about like Big specifically as like an actor in this space of like these kind of like grand utopic visions. I feel like it's very much their brand of like, we're gonna come in and reinvent your whole city. And they obviously have global reach, and they take a lot of people with them for that ride. And it's I don't know, it's kind of problematic.
It's really funny the way that you say that. Like, we're gonna reinvent your city. we're gonna redo your city. We're gonna change the way you live. It sounds like I don't know, like some kind of like intimidating like 90s rap video kind of thing. It's just like, we're gonna come to your city and reinvent it. You know, you've never seen a city like this before.
Well, they do the way they kind of like their brand is like has a lot of audacity. Like what was a couple years ago they came out with their master planet. They wanted to develop a master plan for the entire planet. And it was like,
no one asked you to do that.
Yeah, so you just assign this to yourself and you think you're like qualified to make decisions for the entire planet. It is such a bizarre...
For the whole planet.
Yeah. Again, something I haven't heard about recently. It was like
it's
this
one of these,
big
like,
reveal,
pie in the sky
and then,
ideas.
it was like, ooh, that seemed like it fizzled out.
I don't know where these ideas come from. Like I don't know. Bjarke is sitting down with a group of interns and he does a line of coke and just says, "Design the whole planet," and then they come up with this. Like,
I don't know, but that's a funny picture to imagine now.
I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. Everyone, okay, never mind. I'm not going to go into that. Look, the hubris is just fucking incredible. I mean, obviously, like, you can expect some corporate titan to be like really hubristic, the Elon Musks, the Henry Fords, whatever, and their hubris always comes with like a very, very delicate veil across the fascistic tendencies that they really harbor. But it's always so startling to think about architects this way because, like, don't you know better? Don't you know better than to think that you can, I don't know, that you somehow are smart enough, good enough to design the entire planet for everyone that's on it? I mean...
Yeah, I mean, look at architecture's like foundations though, as like a designer. I mean, look at like the big heavy hitters, quote unquote, of like architecture, like Frank Lloyd
Pyramids?
Wright and Corbu and like all these people that were like very full of themselves. Nobody else was right. Like, you even have to wear these specific clothes in my building. Like, I don't know, there's a kind of totalitarian, like, tendency even underlying some of that, like, you know, as much as we talk about, like, oh, Frank Lloyd Wright and, like, prairie style and, like, the natural house and, like, blending in with the environment and it's, like, sustainability and, like, oh, he wanted these, like, democratic, like, communities. It's like, dude didn't seem all that democratic to me. Like,
it's his special kind of democracy, just for him. He's the voter. He's the only voter, and he votes hard.
Vote early, vote often.
Yeah, right. But yeah, Corb also had these like utopian visions. These like. You've seen them before, like the same kind of scheme that looks like Pruitt-Igoe, and like Pruitt-Igoe is a very complicated story of like a lot of things that went wrong in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not the least of which that the government was using it for testing radiation levels in a local population. That probably wasn't very good for anyone. There's a TrueAnon episode about that you can go find.
No, you know me. I don't listen to podcasts. I just apparently join them.
Okay, well, I can tell you just like briefly, just as a little tangent, because this blows my mind that nobody knows this story. Okay, people talk about like all the different myths about Pruitt-Igoe, like it collapsed because it was full of poor people, or it collapsed because no one liked their buildings, or blah, 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 blah. I can't say which one is right and which one is not because I'm not an expert on the economics, but I do know one very weird thing about Pruitt-Igoe, that sometime the government thought it would be a really good idea to test out what happens during or after a nuclear strike, what happens to the radiation that moves over top of urban populations. They decided to test this by flying planes over Pruitt-Igoe and spraying them with radiation without anyone's consent.
What are they spraying here? It's like just little uranium pellets? Like, what are we talking? Do we know?
I have no idea what form they did it in. Maybe they did some cloud seeding. Maybe they did some contrail stuff. I don't know. maybe they were just spraying particulates. I have no idea how they the exact mechanism of this, but their method of tracing the radiation levels was to ask parents to send in the teeth that their children lose. Like the whole tooth fairy thing.
What?
And
Were they offering
yeah,
a better rate
somewhere-
than the Tooth Fairy? I gotta know.
I don't know. Actually, it's the government. They probably don't really offer that good of a rate on it. Maybe you get a bond.
Sorry, we're
Government bond on
eminent
tooth.
domaining your children's teeth.
Your children, they just can't have that many teeth. They just can't.
What's the eminent domain language? The higher and better use. We've got a higher and better use of your children's teeth. We're gonna need to
that
take
higher
those.
that higher and better use was to track them for radiation levels, because
my
children's
God.
teeth are a great place for tracking radiation levels. No one knows what happens to those teeth, by the way, so it's fully possible there's just a vault with 100,000 children's teeth somewhere in St. Louis, and I hope somebody one day finds that and has a lot of questions.
I have a lot of questions. This is
that's
I
a
hadn't
pretty
heard
fucked
this
up
one
story.
before. I know there's like you said, there's lots of stories about Pruitt-Igoe and all the various reasons, true or not, for what happened to it. But that is wild.
Yeah, I didn't make too much of a tangent, but we were talking about these Corbusian and Wrightian kind of utopias, but I don't know. I also wanted to comment on this notion that you design everything, if it's Bjarke designing the whole planet, or Wright or Korb designing everything in the building, Breuer even. There's this German word, the Gesamtkunstwerk, right? The total work of art.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think in and of itself that is such a bad thing, because you could consider a Gothic cathedral also a Gesamtkunstwerk. They didn't really have door handles to design, because I don't really think they had mechanical doors when they were building Gothic cathedrals the same way that we have them now. But those buildings weren't really made by architects. They were made by groups of craftspeople working together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as such, they designed everything to be bespoke for its intended use and location, and thus the entire building becomes a collaborative work of art. I think there's something utopic in the political agency behind that,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe we're running into the issue again where it's when you concentrate all that power into an individual, it becomes a problem.
Yeah, it's kind of
know?
the evolution of the architect from the role of master builder, overseeing
Mm-hmm.
many trades, and understanding those trades and the limitations of each of them, and working with individual tradesmen, and
Yeah.
there's an idea of like you said, agency of the craftspeople that worked on it to know the best thing to do with their material. I don't know, maybe this is also a romanticization of that, but it's you think about how
I see it the
those
same way,
projects
though.
happened, over a cathedral over the course of hundreds of years was built by all
Yeah.
these different generations of craftspeople. It's kind of impossible to have the singular driving vision of one person. It's kind of this thing that
Exactly.
evolves over time, but I guess it's
And it keeps the whole town employed. It keeps everybody getting food in their mouths. Everybody has something to do that's a collective activity. There's actually something kind of I don't know, maybe it is romantic, but there is something kind of nice about this notion of, the whole town building the tower together.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of interesting to contrast that with the, back to the idea of a technological utopia and the
Yeah.
selling or advertising of all of these advanced technologies as the solution to all of these incredible problems. But they're so it's so wrapped up in this hyper specific specialization for these different technologies that it kind of precludes the potential for like a community to just come together and like
Right.
build this
Right.
thing like over time. I don't know. It kind of like in a way it seems like it divorces the project from the people that it theoretically is supposed to be for.
Yeah. Totally. Because like whether it's I don't know, Dow Chemical working with Buckminster Fuller to design Techno Utopia, or if it's Elon Musk having SpaceX get us to Mars and we're going to live on the SpaceX Mars society thing. These things are all like not really about what it's actually like on a day-to-day basis to live there, rather about getting assigning enough value to the technology
Hmm.
that it seems like the technology can do this incredible thing that changes everything. Whether or not it actually does it is not important. It just seems like it can be this kind of big revolutionary thing,
So
and so they speculate this and take us for a ride on it.
it's a fundraising
You know?
pitch.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of cases it is, and I wonder like how oceanics falls into this, and um, I mean also like are this podcast's favorite, or at least my favorite, Patrick Schumacher's like association with Liberland, which is like a libertarian paradise. Um,
They couldn't have come up with a better name. I mean, uh,
it's so
it's
cringe. It's
neither
really
neither here
the
nor
thing is like
there.
I don't think Patrick came up with the name. I think someone else came up with the name. This like one other guy that runs it. I don't know. I think he's from the Czech Republic, um, and maybe he thinks it sounds cool or something. But it really doesn't roll off the tongue well, and it sounds like I don't know. It sounds like where you'd find a lot of pedophiles. Just the
I was just
name.
thinking about like the idea of the techno utopia being like a fundraising pitch, and
Yeah.
Mark Wigley wrote this book on Bucky Fuller, Architecture in the Age of Radio. That's all about Buckminster Fuller. Really like well researched and like lots of interesting stuff in it. But the one thing he talks a lot about, maybe not a lot about, but is like Bucky's um, like he was constantly like cultivating like his PR like image, like he really like was always pursuing like relationships with like journalists and like trying to plug himself in like all these different ways of like getting
Really.
articles written, and like as like he was very active in like publicizing his own work, which I think is something like really interesting. Like that was a new thing for me reading that, like knowing a lot of other stuff and having read like Bucky's own work, that it's like you don't get that side of the picture from obviously reading his own
Yeah.
works. He's not going to be like, yeah, I really plug myself, you know.
He's the kind of guy that's trying to write his own history. But this is like Musk does the same thing. Musk will only talk to journalists that he likes.
Hmm.
He pays for himself to be mentioned in an episode of Star Trek, for instance, right? As like one of the like right up there with Zefram Cochrane from Star Trek lore.
Hmm.
You know, like he he's doing the exact same thing as apparently Bucky did. I had no idea that Buckminster Fuller was so uh, careful about curating his future image.
I think my take is like from a little bit of a different motivation probably,
Yeah.
but similarly like it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors, I think, of like cultivating this image of like what something's doing versus like maybe what it actually was. I don't know.
Yeah, this I think is very interesting. This like method of spinning something like this, right? And then you always like when you sense this kind of spin, like now that I'm like I had no idea that he was cultivating this image so hard. It really makes you wonder like what was happening behind the scenes, like who was actually profiting off of this, right?
I mean, I think he was actually truly like somebody that just was so absorbed in his own work and like
Mm.
was like he really genuinely seemed to believe that his designs and like the uh artifacts that he was bringing into the world would like revolutionize human existence in a way that would like he actually like if you read his own work, like he essentially like imagines like a communist utopia, like no borders, no money, like we don't need any of these things, these are all superfluous, we have enough to like exist in harmony and like peace. I mean, he's super interesting. I'm still like I started diving into his stuff more maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I was reading more of it, like working on my grad thesis, and like still am not really sure how I feel about the guy. Like, just like
There's so many contradictions.
I know, yeah, and that's the thing. It's like he was remarkably like I think prescient for like when he did a lot of his work, like in thinking about and articulating like things that were or were going to be issues for society on like a global scale, but at the same time, yeah, like I mentioned in the essay, like he was working hand in hand with Dow and DuPont for decades building structures for the US military. Like those things are like so hard to resolve, but he
It's such a strange pattern that happens with, a lot of people who you want to think of as like good, perfect geniuses. I mean, the military has always got money. Dow Chemical, DuPont, they always have money. And there's a lot of scientists that work for them that they only get funding to do things that are at the interests of Dow Chemical, DuPont, or the U.S. military. And those things are not often things that are going to help the world, but rather things that fit the political motivations of those companies or governments,
Yeah, I mean, I like Bucky at least thought that if the technology advanced sufficiently, like it would automatically lead to like a change in like human consciousness and perception, that we would just like begin to, I don't know, it's like Lenin's like withering away of the state. Yeah, it just like withers away. Don't worry about it. But he
skip
like
some steps. Okay.
no, it's just gone now.
Don't worry.
There's this passage that Bucky wrote about like he was trying to think so far ahead that he wouldn't, like his ideas would be so far out that he would not be threatening to like the people funding his work, essentially. It's I must avoid setting too short.
This sounds like
I was just gonna read part of this. I must avoid setting too short an overall consummation period for my critical path. It was of prime importance that I adopt a target date so far in the future as to avoid making uneasy any of the power structures of 1927, which might feel that their interests were threatened by what I was proposing. It was necessary that I reach so far beyond the power structure's research-determined vision of their most forward development that my concepts would appear to either be a pleasant pipe dream or innocuous nonsense. Like that was...
Science fiction.
Yeah, more or less. It's like, I'm designing Star Trek, so don't worry about it. I'm not threatening you.
No, Dow Chemical is going to make the Enterprise. It's okay, don't worry. I mean, but this is like there's validity in this actually. I mean, a lot of they had iPads in the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The flip phone is the communicator from the original Star Trek. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like all of this technology, like people have thought about a long time ago, and it's not to say that like I don't know, somebody from Motorola who looked at the flip phone, or Steve Jobs who had a whole bunch of other people make the iPad for him.
No. He created it entirely himself. Gave birth
at home
to
in
it.
his little workshop, just putting things together. Refining all that aluminum by hand, all that cobalt.
It was all in his garage, dude.
Yeah, not the suiciding Chinese workers. But yeah, science fiction like gave ground to a lot of like it opened up at least our imagination to the potential of a lot of technologies, and I mean for better or for worse, some science fictions have a positive outlook on the future, some a negative outlook on the future. And I think at least our generation, you and me, we think of Star Trek as having this like positive outlook on the future because, you know, we're next generation era, where like it is a scientific and technological utopia. And it wasn't until like, this is maybe getting a bit nerdy for some people who don't watch Star Trek, but if you don't, shame on you. But like once you get into DS9, you start to realize the problems inherent in the utopia itself. And Deep Space Nine, you start to see like how there are oppressive facets of the utopian empire that are a bit problematic.
Section 31
and
and all that kind of nonsense.
Yeah, space CIA. They had space CIA. You know? And the Bajoran homeworld, whose totalitarian government was preserved by the Federation, right? I mean, it was really wild to see a Star Trek show where you had good guys who were terrorists. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I just wanted to say Bucky's idea of like science fiction is a really, really good idea. I think it's relatable to all of us. That you can like spin things far in the future and imagine this technology in the future as a way like that it could conduct society in a way that's like outside of the grasp of the powers that exist today. And there's nothing wrong with this. I don't think there's anything bad about that at all, actually.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I'm trying to remember an essay. I think it's an interview with two. I might have to come back to it. I'm forgetting who it's with, but it's a discussion between like two philosophers and like talking about technology and the idea that technology is like you can use it for good or bad.
Yeah.
Like in almost any case, and it's like the idea that technology inherently is going to like lead to a positive outcome is like
sure
kind of contrary to all of human history, right? So this is like what you kind of talk about a lot is like the propping up of STEM and the like defunding of like arts and like humanities education, like how to think about like these big ideas and like what you're actually doing with a piece of technology or like
right.
a piece of knowledge. Even like you have to be able to think about how it meshes together with like social and cultural issues and like people's perception and all of that.
That's the worm in my brain, and it's not just like to have the technology, to invent the technology, like you need money, and that money's got to like go somewhere, and it goes into education, like, and you put money into STEM education because you want kids to grow up and start inventing crazy things that keep the markets going, that keep the military innovating, that keep creating new commodities and new products and like so on and so forth. But then you strip away the arts education and there's no longer the ability to critically analyze culture and those commodities and how those commodities are being used. So you have trouble like ethically picking apart when someone tells you like, okay, we're going to have a cruise ship that's running entirely on Bitcoin, and that's a good thing. Because in terms of STEM, that sounds like you're just putting all the great things together. This has to be good, right?
This is just a series of buzzwords.
Yeah, it is. It is just like tape all the technology buzzwords together, make one big collage, say, don't you love it? Let's put it on the fridge. But you don't have the arts education to critique that collage and the social and cultural impacts that it's going to have. So you end up with problems.
Yeah, I mean, you end up with the Sam Bankman-Frieds of the world who are like, books shouldn't exist. Could be an email.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
What?
Or why
me?
even email? I'll just use Grammarly to write my emails. I don't need to write emails. Who needs to write emails? I mean, you just plug in just like the Sam Bankman-Frieds are really interesting with this like effective altruism, which is all pretty much dead at this point. And there was that like little pocket in time, I think probably almost entirely conducted by him sitting on his beanbag I know I'm sitting on a beanbag, but I'm not like him. Taking Adderall and just going nuts. I don't know, playing League of Legends or like creating crypto schemes and then funneling that money into whatever kinds of utopic causes that his STEM brain, that didn't have the cultural awareness of what he was doing, like thought were advantageous for society, but only on his terms. This guy was a multi-billionaire, funneling money into like ridiculous age prolonging technology, or like, you know, who knows what other kind of like ridiculous things that are just an absolute waste of resources, because for whom is it for?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I don't know. I also wanted to read, like, I wanted to talk a little bit about, because we were talking about the seasteading thing. There was this really great quote I found from Patrick, and it's just laced with all of these buzzwords. And I think it's really interesting to pick
Ooh,
apart.
I can't wait.
Yeah, it's really good. It's from I got it from this like Liquid States publication, which says he waxes lyrically about this like utopic seasteading thing. And I don't know, like, if you want to make this into a drinking game, like, do a shot every time there's like a word that you can't really define in the
Wait,
context mentioned.
this is Patrick Schumacher?
I have a quote. Yeah, this is I put it on the docket. Like, I have a quote from him.
Oh, but he's talking about the seasteading thing?
Yeah, because he was involved with the seasteading thing.
I didn't know that. I mean, I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah, Zaha didn't. Zaha,
Right, yeah.
ZHA, under Patrick, did some designs for it, even especially recently.
Of course he did. God.
Yeah, of course he did. Of course he had some suffering interns do that. And like there was even some like recent startup stuff, some more Peter Thiel funded crap that was that he was part of the, you know, design process for, with some very bizarre notions of society. This is the reference I was trying to find. It was one of the newer seasteading things was CEO'd by this like 19 or 20-year-old guy who said something about how like society will be divided into like 3 classes. And you're like, okay, that sounds problematic. But then you find out what the classes are. A warrior class, a merchant class, and like I think an artisan class or something like that. It's just like
Nobody grows food.
How does that work?
No, we don't eat it anymore.
Class.
We've evolved beyond the need to eat.
No, the merchant class. You just buy the food. There's no one don't worry about growing.
Of course, it's provided by the market.
It's like a multi-million-dollar 19-year-old CEO who's only played like League of Legends or something like that, and thinks he has a way society should run. I think it was Patrick that was working on that project also. Okay, so I want to read this quote. Patrick says about these micronations, the notion of a fluid totality can be understood as both the characterization of an existing societal condition and as an architectural concept/ambition. To make this condition perceptually palatable within the global built environment and to further intensify and facilitate its complex flourishing. That's one sentence. How can a light touch urban mainframe, entrepreneurial, free market, urban order in a society whose functional values include maximum individual liberty, minimum government, voluntary taxation and charity, unencumbered free markets utilizing cryptocurrency, private property, prosperity flourishing from personal responsibility and risk, individual moral and freedom, privatized infrastructure and services, voluntary contractual institutions, voluntary cooperation, nonviolence, non-coercion, in other words, freedom. Ta-da! He nailed it. He found the perfect utopia.
Oh, God. I like how the first sentence doesn't even say anything.
It's unintelligible.
Like, yeah,
It's totally
there's
unintelligible.
there's
I
no
can't
point
even,
to it. Like what?
I really like read this 3 times trying to figure out what it means. A fluid totality can be under like an existing societal condition and as an architectural ambition to make this condition perceptually palatable within the global. This first sentence, it doesn't say anything. He's literally just used a whole bunch of words to say, we can make something that does something.
He should have wrote, "Look how smart I am."
Yeah.
That would have been
like,
the point he's trying to make by stringing all of those words together.
Right.
I am so smart, you don't even get it.
When I was 8 years old, I ate a thesaurus, and now I'm here. And then he goes on to list these values of the utopia, and I think like they go hand in hand with the big oceanics project, and you know, it's kind of like there is a history of these utopias, like we talked about, and like there is a history of like them being used for more wholesome political leftist political ideas, not like the right-leaning Liberland, and then there's a history of them being used for corporate means or for the desires of like the individual, and they all kind of like reduce down to, if you boil it all down, what Patrick is actually saying is the quiet part out loud. This is what a lot of them want. They want like minimum government, voluntary taxation,
which is also a misleading phrase. Voluntary taxation. They will volunteer not to pay taxes. Those with the most money. Yeah. It's like, yeah. First off, the concept of taxation doesn't really work that way. And second, like,
no.
So you're talking about not paying your taxes.
Literally, no one's going to pay their taxes. No one's going to do it. I mean, poor people can't do it because of the maximum free market liberty. And you know what that's going to do to poor people? And rich people are not going to do it because of maximum free market liberty. So why even mention that part? Yeah, these unencumbered free markets utilizing cryptocurrency, which is very similar to the we're not going to tax things. It's just like, you don't need to know what my money's doing. Yeah. Prosperity flourishing from personal responsibility and risk. Seems sketchy. Individual moral freedom, privatized infrastructure and services, and then he's going on with this, and that. But what he finishes with is one of the most interesting things that kind of throws it all away. Non-violence and non-coercion would be a part of this society.
Right, but also his perception of the limits of violence and coercion are probably, like, the boundary for him is like physical. Like, he probably would not acknowledge the idea of like economic coercion. Like, you're too poor to do anything else, so you're going to do what I want. Like, to him that would be this is just the free market operating.
Yeah,
the grandeur of the free market.
He would ban. Yeah, 100%. Like, he would ban the things that he's probably personally terrified about, and that's somebody coming after him with a gun and stealing his wallet, or getting his bank account off of him. The things that like would affect his bottom line, but he's totally ignoring the things that everybody who's not part of this, floating 1% of society would have to deal with, and that is the fact that every single thing is privatized. Every single thing is like, you have no power over everything, so you actually don't have freedom. So you live in a constant state of coercion if you don't have economic power.
The thing that baffles me about Patrick, and like the reason, I mean, among many, but like just the most succinct like thought of his for me of like why he should not even be taken seriously as an architect is when he was talking about like I think he was talking about like like housing code in Great Britain or something, and how like it was silly that like
Yeah.
we would be required to have like windows in a housing unit or something, like that the market should determine like people's access to like daylight. I was like, it's so like anti-humanist. It's like you only
Exactly.
get daylight if you have enough money, and that's okay.
Exactly. And
It's
this,
like, no, you are not a serious architect. Like I can't take that seriously as a proposition
yeah.
from somebody that is like we're like our ethical code as a profession is to like maintain the health and well-being of like the people that occupy our buildings.
Yeah. I mean, we don't take a Hippocratic oath of architecture, but maybe we fucking should.
Yeah, probably. I mean,
You
look at
know?
how close like Charlie Munger's like dorm came to being built. Like, yeah, I think there should be like the
Yeah.
equivalent of a Hippocratic oath for architecture. That would make a lot of sense.
I mean, yeah. I mean, if this is something, this like do no harm notion, we're already under like a legal responsibility of do no harm.
Hmm.
I mean, to be honest, it's physical harm and property harm that we can't do or let happen with what we design. But uh, this is actually becoming a very interesting idea in my head. If we did have to take a Hippocratic oath to actually not harm individuals, then we'd be required to provide daylight. We'd be required to provide fresh air. We'd be required to provide clean an environment where like you don't go nuts because you're just breathing in too much CO2 and ruining your brain function.
Hmm.
That's very important. It doesn't get talked about very often. Heat and cooling, like these kinds of things, all need to be provided for. Um, for Patrick to say that like a window is a luxury item essentially. Uh, I'd love to know where he came from. I'd love to know how he grew up. Um, I'd love to know, like, if he came from money or something like this. Like, have you ever had to live like shit? It sucks. Like, you know, like, it is an awful struggle. And just because you've made it somewhere and you're going to look down your nose on people who haven't made it, probably not for lack of trying, because everyone's trying, um, it completely lacks empathy. And I don't feel like he should be qualified to be an architect if he's going to be like this,
Yeah, totally agree.
you know?
His Wikipedia page
I
doesn't
don't
say
know.
anything about his childhood.
Oh, we need to
Maybe you
I
should
want to
go
do an
add something. I
investigation.
don't.
Yes, I should. All right. This is good. I'm on a temporary IP right now. I'm moving in a few months. I can vandalize Wikipedia again. And he edits his own Wikipedia, so he's going to see it.
Well, nobody else is going to.
Yeah, fair. Look, I just think this goes back to this awful notion of a utopia that's created by an individual, and this is what's coalescing in my head. That's created by an individual and under a certain individual's own um, ways of thinking that comply with their ideal of society can be incredibly toxic because you put a
Hmm.
lot of faith in that individual to be a good person. And the people that are talking about these utopias now, whether it's Bjarke or much worse Patrick, are not good people. Or
Yeah.
Peter Thiel, I don't think he's a good person. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to be a billionaire and be a good person. I think,
Yeah, of
like,
course, definitely.
yeah, I don't
There's
know,
no organic way to become a billionaire.
like I'm so curious about Bjarke, like, as a, for well, like what I've heard, the kind of blanking on the word. I've heard that he like it's actually like pretty nice working for Big. Like from what I've heard from a couple
I've
people,
heard that
like
too.
they treat their people like fairly well. They're not like it's not like the horror stories you hear about like OMA of like they just work him to the
Yeah,
bone, which is interesting because he came from OMA and it seems like he has
yeah,
cultivated like a much better like studio culture. Which so it's like I'm just so curious about like what like his internal thought processes and like how he thinks about like what he's putting into the world. Like if he has taken that history of like being treated like shit probably at OMA, and has like, you know, I theoretically intentionally like crafted a better culture, but then is still kind of wrapped up in these like these larger notion like utopic notions that are kind of like
Yeah.
a little bit of nonsense. I mean, they did like some of their projects are like admittedly very interesting. Probably more of their earlier work than anything I've seen recently, but still, like there is a certain like something there.
Yeah, it's. I mean, like, I don't think working for Bjarke is probably that bad either. I've heard the same thing as you. Like, it's like you're treated pretty well. And now that they're a much bigger company, they're doing a lot more in house. It's probably a lot less chaotic, also. I don't know. It's hard to reconcile this though. This like, you know, probably more positive work environment to work for than OMA, but like it's hard to trust anyone who wants to design the whole planet.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
You know?
it's hard to look at that and say, there's no ego here.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it comes down to is when you know when the ego gets involved, when there's like, you know, an obvious sign of an ego, like I don't know if you should be running the world, you know, if you're so in it for yourself.
I
That's the
did want
opposite of a
to
democracy.
I did want to see what your you had marked the Bedford quote on here as something you wanted to touch on, and I'm curious what.
Oh, that was really good from the article. Yeah, I took a screen capture of it, and I kind of wanted to bring this up to you. Now I've got to find the screen. Yeah, okay. So you mentioned Bedford's article, "Hope Through Design," kind of, I guess, taking from Tifuri and Colin Rowe, which is what you said, and you said. Political conflict is inherent to the human species, and that it is better to confront this reality and deploy architectural space and form as a mediating device to negotiate it than escape into the fantasy of the open field. I think that's a very interesting quote, like super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, to me, it raises a lot of questions of. I mean, thinking about these things as architectural projects, like it raises a lot of questions about like representation. Like you think about like the kind of like glossy renderings that we do for like a project like Oceanics or like these kind of grand visions of like a sustainable future kind of thing. Like that quote raises a lot of questions for me if we're like embedding the inherent idea of like human conflict into a design. Like, what does that mean for how we represent a project, or like how do we think about that through like how we draw or model something, or like how do we accommodate that, and how do we portray it back to people? Because like so much of what we do is a tool to like represent more complex ideas in a way that people can digest and understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good that essay is, I think, worth reading the whole thing. It's part of Imagining Architecture Beyond the End Times, which Joseph Bedford edited with a handful of other authors. There's some good pieces in there, but his essay is pretty thought provoking.
But he really hits the nail on the head, kind of like, and also with what we've been talking about. I like his notion of using. It almost sounds like he's talking about using architecture and form as a mediator, as a kind of like something to like help solve problems, but perhaps in a way. And I had this phrased in my head, but now I've forgotten the phrasing I had. In a way as to like solve the current problems without starting over. You know, and this is what I think he's talking about, or at least what I get out of what he's saying about the open field. Whether you're going away into space to find a brand new colony and leave this planet behind, or you're building on the ocean because the land is bad, or rising sea levels or what have you, or you're building in a desert because you want to make a tourist resort city, or you're building in Gaza because you want to make a tourist resort city. this notion of like starting from scratch is, I think, always the worst approach. If you can at least repurpose the architecture and form that's already there in a way to enhance society instead of just leaving it behind and starting again. That's kind of what I got out of this.
Yeah, no,
I
I think you hit the nail on the head. There's another portion of this. He says, where fantasy functions by absorbing the real within the imaginary, hope functions by maintaining a dialectical intersection between the real and the imaginary. In hope, a distance is maintained between what is the case and what ought to be the case. And as such, the real is confronted through a consciousness of this distance and yet a refusal to submit to it. So it's like this idea of like this is the way things are, and like acknowledging that and using that as a starting point, not like divorcing yourself entirely into like some different world where like, oh, everything's different. So this is how things are, and we don't have to acknowledge like this cloudy area of like what we think it should be, and like the distance between them is like the how to get there, in my kind of interpretation. Which is, seems like maybe the most important part. It's like, this is where we want to get, this is where we are, so this is the path through it.
Yeah, you need those extra steps. Like like you said, Lenin said the state just fades away. Like, you need the steps.
No, tell us what happens between.
What's the South Park thing? Step 1, step 2, question mark, step 3, profit.
Yeah.
But this quote that you just read is stupidly fascinating, because like the way that he talks about hope. Can you read the part where he's talking about hope again?
Hope functions by maintaining a dialectical intersection between the real and the imaginary. In hope, a distance is maintained between what is the case and what ought to be the case.
That's interesting, because I mean, like, I don't want to go into the psychoanalytic side of like what he's talking about with the real and the imaginary like too much in depth. And I haven't read any Lacan in a little while, so I'm a little bit foggy on it anyways. But it sounds like hope is opening a tendency towards delusion, where you're kind of like, if the real is something that is entirely unknown and withdrawn, and you're letting the imagination kind of cross over into the real by just picking apart any possible potential future and thus aligning that with hope. I mean, this is how desire works anyways. I think there's a bit of a danger of doing too much of that, where if you're expanding upon this fantasy of hope too much, you lose track of the material conditions on the ground, because you're kind of stuck in the imaginary world. If that makes a little bit of sense.
No, it does.
Right?
It does make sense. I'm just kind of trying to peruse back through the essay, because I think he does start to address that. He talks about like Cool House and pornography and like Sloterdijk and like the
good stuff.
Like like you mentioned, I think that like the element of desire and like mediating desire.
Well, because like a lot of these utopias are, I mean, they're products of desire. Like to create something new is to, exactly, intersect the imaginary and the real, to pull something out of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And though I know it is like a synthesis always of the influences around you, the introduction of like a brand new concept or way of living to be like visionary is kind of adding something over top of the real that wasn't there. You're creating something new in the imaginary, and as such you're channeling desire towards it.
Mm-hmm.
But just like if all you do is watch movies all day, or all you do is play video games all day, or all you do is hang out with rich people that talk about colonizing space all day, you lose track of material reality. That's why everything Elon Musk touches turns to dust, because he's living in the hope world, and he's not living in reality.
He somehow
He's
manifested his
lost.
salary.
I mean, I think if you start with $1 billion, it's easy to manifest another few billion. Or whatever they gave him when they kicked him out of PayPal. But this makes sense also why so many of these utopic-minded people just are completely out of touch. And they're distancing themselves from material reality. They're only existing in their imaginations. They live. It's describing a bubble. It's a bubble.
Mm-hmm.
They live in bubbles.
Well, their material conditions are so different from like the vast majority of everybody else on Earth that like their perception of what things are and what they ought to be is totally divorced from the other 99% of humans on Earth. That like, oh, I desire to live forever. It's like, well, that's because you have nothing left to want, basically. Like I don't know.
Yeah, and that is like I think the ultimate bubble of this like late stage capitalist kind of environment that we're in, is that we're being kind of swung around the bubble like matter around a black hole of this, the bubble that the 1% kind of lives in,
Mm-hmm.
or these people that are kind of controlling everything with all of the resources. We're just ephemera being flung around because of their gravity.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it.
Which is kind of awful. Yeah, it's just kind of awful, and if all of the ideas are coming out of inside of that bubble, then and all of us are kind of silenced, given that we don't have access to the platforms that they have. What agency do we have to actually propose better utopias?
I mean, it's an argument for organization, really. Like if we roll with your gravity analogy, like why they have gravity because of their command of resources, but the people in your picture that are swirling around like comprise a much greater mass if consolidated together. So like
right, and you need to
create
stop looking at the bubble.
Yeah.
Bingo. Stop looking at the bubble. Look at all that matter that's coalesced around the black hole. That's whole planets. So that's like an insane amount of matter.
Mm-hmm.
If you keep your eyes on the ground and you don't keep your eyes on the bubble, then you'll notice the people around you, and these are the people that you need to organize with.
Yeah.
Not based on what the billionaires are telling you or what the seasteaders are telling you, or because their futures are for them. They're not for you.
I'm picturing a world where Peter Thiel just buys Carnival Cruise Lines and suddenly like is just trapping people at sea, like the cruise ships never come back, and it's like it's like no, we're starting this is a utopia, trust me, it's gonna be great. And they all just stay at sea.
We're gonna try it. We're just gonna try it.
Sorry, you signed the waiver when you got on board. Like, I didn't read that.
He could just do this. I mean, I guess he could just do this. He could just buy a cruise ship. I mean, I know they were trying to make a cryptocurrency cruise ship, but I guess he could just buy a cruise ship and trap a whole bunch of fucking people there.
Yeah, no, the whole cruise line.
Get this Lord of the Flies situation. Yeah.
It's like a little petri dish.
They just too. Yeah, exactly. String them together like a those caravans when the West was being expanded. String them together out on the ocean like that in a big circle. So when the orcas come to try to tip them over, they have a little protection. No, I mean they're too big for orcas to tip over, but
it's unfortunate.
Who knows? Maybe he'll try this. Maybe he'll have his own little cabin on there, and they'll fly him new blood boys for transfusions so he can live forever.
Yeah, probably.
And then you'll have a Lord of the Flies on the open seas.
And then Kevin Costner comes and saves the day.
Yeah, okay. That's what Kevin Costner is the rest of us. He's the one that's outside of the bubble of the 1%.
It's still total tangent. It still blows my mind how much of his own money he put into that movie.
Which one?
Waterworld.
He funded it himself?
Yeah, like most of it, I'm pretty sure. He funded
No
like
way.
a large percentage of that movie. Was like
I had
his
no idea.
personal yeah, we're doing Waterworld.
That's awesome. Okay, the thing is, I've never actually seen it.
Oh no.
Um, it's one of my dad's favorite movies.
Is that why you haven't watched it? You're just like staunchly like, no, I can't watch this.
No, no, I just like never got around to it, and like I don't know, it was never high on my list of movies that I need to see. Like, it's
You gotta, I think, you should bump it higher on the list, especially after this conversation about
okay.
seasteading and all of that. I think it's worth a watch.
Okay, that's actually fair. Yeah, okay. It's super relevant. I think that everybody needs to watch Waterworld now.
Yeah, it's gonna be a
And maybe it
sudden.
holds up to time. Maybe it's better than it was. We look back on it and we're like, yeah, that was a
That I
great
make
fucking
no
movie.
guarantees for. It's been a long time since I've seen it.
Yeah. Well, should we wrap up?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I don't know. I know you had some notes at the end here. I don't know if that's what you want to
Yeah,
end
it,
on
it
or.
was. I mean, it was just this like. We can maybe we can talk about it just briefly. I just thought this like, this way the way you concluded the article was very interesting. And maybe you can just like talk about that as we like wrap up today. You mentioned Hito Steyer uh, in their essay "How to Kill People: A Problem of Design." There's this quote that you use in the conclusion, which I thought was super interesting. Warfare, construction, and destruction literally take place behind screens, undercover, requiring planning and installation. Blueprints are designed. Troops were deployed, as well as architects. She also says the interesting thing is not that these events happened. The interesting thing is that most people think that they are perfectly normal. Disaffection is part of the overall design structure, along with the feeling that all of this is too difficult to comprehend and too specific to unravel. Which I absolutely love that quote because it really hit the nail on the head. Also, with what we were just talking about with being caught in the gravity of the rich and not realizing what's going on around us.
Mhm.
Like, we're all suffering from this kind of disaffection.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
think it's that idea of like the banality of evil. Like it's just these
Yeah.
um, things that are seemingly like every day. Just like, oh, I'm just, I'm drawing a detail for this thing, but it's part of this like much larger effort that you
Right.
you might not be seeing your own part in. Um, and I think that,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
it kind of goes back to the conversation about like the arts and humanities and being able to situate yourself in the context of like a broader kind of societal or cultural context of the work that you're doing, which I think is really important
Right.
for us to be
Exactly.
able to acknowledge and navigate and like think about our part in.
Yeah. I mean, it's like keeping your nose on the ground, like keeping an awareness of what's going on around you, even if you're powerless to change what's going on around you, because this is not a very healthy industry. To be able to understand it and talk about it with your peers, like get conversations going, is huge, huge progress.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that just like
Compared to
challenging that idea that you're powerless to do anything about it, it's like it might not be,
yeah,
to the topic that we've been discussing, like the idea of utopia, it might not be this like grand vision that like, oh, I built this shining city on a hill, but it's like it's little things that we can potentially
hmm
impact on the day to day,
sure,
or just like, our refusal to do something is
true,
a drop in a larger bucket that, you know, hopefully gets dumped over
that's
somebody's
true.
head.
Yeah, so make your own utopia, but keep it small. Start a neighborhood garden. That's nice, you know.
Yeah.
Something like this. Um, I just thought that was a really great quote to kind of conclude the paper with. Um, yeah. So I don't know. Do you have anything else to add? I think it was a really great paper, and I hope everyone goes to read it. It really gets a lot of discussions going.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I don't know that I have much else to add. I feel like I think I started the conversation with the idea that like I don't think that it really resolves itself like the ideas in the essay, and I think that I don't know, it's a difficult like way like difficult to end the conversation because I don't think there's ever really like a tidy ending like okay, we talked about it,
Yeah,
it's done, like you know, it could just keep going,
it's a
but
process. It's not.
yeah.
Yeah, it's not like we're gonna have a solution to this on a podcast.
Mhm.
Podcasts aren't gonna change the world. Uh, maybe they will. Who knows? Um, but I mean, I think it's
Yeah, I
really
think
interesting
that's
that you
kind of
raise all these
the aim of
questions.
like thing like I try and get to that. I think the like the best compliments I get from people like if I share like essays and stuff is when people just tell me that like oh this was like really interesting and I went up and looked up like all these different things that you talked about because like it made me think about these things in relation to other things. It's just like if I've provoked people to think about things in a different way or like give people
Yeah,
a spark of interest in something they hadn't thought about before. Like that's I think that's the biggest compliment.
yeah, that's great. I think that's like the best way to approach it. That's the best thing to get out of it.
Hmm. All right. Well, thanks
Cool.
everybody for listening, and I hope you can go over to architov.com and check out the essay, and you know, feel free to share your thoughts if you have any.
Architecture could be an instrument of freedom and it could be an instrument of repression. And if you feel that this is pre-given, you've given up on the fight, we're lost.